Ladies and gentlemen, have you ever felt trapped in a love that drains you, that twists your heart into doubt, that leaves you questioning your own worth? Imagine carrying someone else's chaos as if it were yours, only to realize the real power wasn't theirs. It was yours all along. Tonight, I want to take you on a journey of awakening, of reclaiming yourself, of leaving a narcissist not with anger, but with peace, growth, and unstoppable strength. By the end of this talk, you'll see how freedom isn't given. It's claimed step by step, heartbeat by heartbeat. The moment of awakening rarely arrives like a thunderclap. It doesn't usually come with drama or a final, undeniable act. More often, it arrives quietly, almost gently, in the middle of an ordinary day. You're not crying, you're not fighting, you're just tired. Tired of explaining yourself, tired of replaying conversations in your head, wondering how you always end up apologizing for feelings you didn't choose. That's when something shifts. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" and start asking, "Why does this keep happening?" At first, you resist the realization. You tell yourself it's stress or miscommunication or that all relationships have rough patches. You cling to the good moments because they feel so alive, so convincing. But slowly, a pattern begins to emerge. The same cycle repeats: affection followed by dismissal, promises followed by confusion, closeness followed by cold distance. And you realize the pain isn't accidental, it's systematic. That awakening is painful because it breaks an illusion. You see that the hurt wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a design that always benefited one side. You notice how your empathy was used as a doorway, how your patience became permission, how your love slowly turned into self-doubt. This realization doesn't make you feel powerful at first. It makes you grieve. You grieve the version of yourself who kept hoping things would change. But embedded in that grief is clarity. And clarity is dangerous to manipulation. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The fog lifts, and even though the truth hurts, it also grounds you. This is the moment where denial loosens its grip and self-trust begins to return. It's the first crack in the cage. Not freedom yet, but awareness. And awareness is always the beginning of leaving. And once that awareness settles in, something unexpected happens. You stop trying to make them see, you stop rehearsing speeches in your head, stop gathering evidence like you're preparing for an emotional trial. Because you realize something quietly radical. Their understanding was never the missing piece. Your self-recognition was, this is where guilt enters the room, not as a weapon you hold, but as a mirror they can no longer avoid. You see, guilt doesn't come from being accused. It comes from being confronted by truth without distraction. For the longest time, you were the distraction. Your explanations, your tears, your willingness to stay and try again gave them somewhere to redirect the discomfort. As long as you were reacting, guilt had no place to land. But the moment you step back, the moment you stop absorbing blame that was never yours, the mirror turns toward them. Not because you pointed it there, but because there's nowhere else for it to face. Your silence becomes reflective, your absence becomes loud. And this is the part people misunderstand. You are not leaving to make them feel guilty. Guilt cannot be forced. It can only surface when manipulation loses its grip. When you stop cushioning their behavior with your empathy, they are left alone with the residue of their actions. Some will try to outrun it, some will deny it. But guilt has a way of lingering when there's no one left to carry it for them. What makes this powerful is that you didn't change them. You changed your position. You stopped standing between them and their own reflection. And in doing so, you reclaim something essential, your emotional sovereignty. This isn't cruelty, it's honesty. It's allowing cause and effect to finally meet. And while you move forward, lighter and clearer, they are left to sit with what was always theirs to face. That's not revenge. That's reality catching up. And once you understand that, once you see that guilt does its work best in silence, you begin to release the urge to explain yourself one last time. You feel that familiar pull to send a message, to offer closure, to make them finally understand why you're leaving. It feels responsible. It feels mature. But deep down, you know the truth. You've already explained yourself 1,000 times. Leaving without explanation isn't about being cold. It's about being honest with your own history. Every explanation you ever gave was met with deflection, minimization, or just enough remorse to reset the cycle. Words became doors they walked through to regain access. So this time, you choose a different kind of communication, one that doesn't require language. Silence in this moment is not absence. It is a boundary that doesn't negotiate. It is the first time you stop translating your pain into something more digestible for someone else. And that's when the dynamic truly shifts. Without your words to twist, without your emotions to manage, they are left with nothing but the echo of what they dismissed. This kind of silence is uncomfortable, especially for someone who is used to controlling the narrative. It removes the stage. It denies the final argument, the dramatic exit, the rewritten version of events where they emerge misunderstood or victimized. There is no closing statement, only distance. And distance tells the truth more clearly than any speech ever could. For you, it becomes an act of self-respect. You're no longer seeking permission to leave or approval for your decision. You're choosing to trust the clarity you fought so hard to earn. And in that quiet departure, something profound happens. You stop abandoning yourself. You walk away not with bitterness, but with restraint. Not with chaos, but with calm. That calm, the kind that doesn't explain itself, is what lingers. It's what stays with you. And it's what they can't undo. And in that calm, something long neglected begins to surface. At first, it feels unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, like wearing a coat you forgot belonged to you. This is where self-worth starts to return, not as a loud declaration, but as a quiet remembering. You begin to notice how much of yourself you had been bargaining away, how love in that space required you to soften your voice, doubt your instincts, second-guess your needs. You called it compromise. You called it loyalty. But slowly, you see it for what it was, self-erasure disguised as devotion. Reclaiming your self-worth doesn't happen in a single brave moment. It happens in small, defiant choices. You stop justifying why something hurt you. You stop over-explaining your boundaries. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And one day, almost without realizing it, you no longer feel the need to prove that you are worthy of being treated well. This is a dangerous shift, not for you, but for the dynamic you left behind. Because a narcissistic bond feeds on your doubt. It survives on your willingness to question yourself instead of the behavior in front of you. The moment you understand that love should not cost you your sense of self, the contract is broken. You start measuring relationships differently now. Not by how much you can endure, but by how safe you feel being fully present. You realize that real love doesn't require you to shrink so someone else can feel bigger. It doesn't punish you for having needs. It doesn't ask you to disappear to keep the peace. And this is where your power truly returns. Not in anger, not in confrontation, but in alignment. You are no longer trying to be chosen. You are choosing yourself. And once that happens, you become unreachable to what once controlled you. Not because you hardened your heart, but because you finally learned its value. And when you finally choose yourself, something else quietly collapses, the illusion that they ever truly held power over you. You start to see it clearly now. Their control was never strength, it was dependency. It relied on your attention, your reactions, your emotional labor. It lived off the constant exchange where you gave and they took. For a long time, it felt like they were in charge of the emotional climate. They decided when things were good, when affection was available, when distance would be used as punishment. But the truth reveals itself. Once you step out of the pattern, control only exists where participation continues. The moment you stop engaging, the structure has nothing to stand on. You notice how quickly their confidence unravels when you no longer orbit around them, how attempts to provoke you feel hollow, how their need to be seen, validated, admired grows louder as you grow quieter. This is not because you've done something wrong. It's because the supply has been cut off. And here's the part that reframes everything. You were never powerless. You were powerful enough to sustain the dynamic, and that means you are powerful enough to end it. The control you thought they had was actually borrowed from your willingness to stay, to care, to keep hoping. As you withdraw that energy, not with hostility, but with clarity, the imbalance corrects itself. You stop being reactive and start being grounded. You respond less, explain nothing, and protect your peace without apology. And in that groundedness, their tactics lose effectiveness. They can no longer pull the same strings because you are no longer attached to the outcome. This is not about dominance or winning. It's about freedom. You are no longer playing a game whose rules were designed to exhaust you. You step off the board entirely. And that's when real power returns, not as control over them, but as sovereignty over yourself. And stepping off the board changes everything. At first, it feels like loss, like you've given something up. You might even mistake that hollow space for loneliness. But slowly, you realize what you're actually experiencing is detachment, and detachment is not emptiness, it's relief. Emotional detachment doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop bleeding. You stop tying your peace to someone else's behavior. You stop waking up wondering what version of them you'll get today. Instead of scanning the room for emotional cues, you start listening inward. And that shift is liberating. For so long, your nervous system was trained to stay alert, to anticipate moods, to manage reactions. Detachment breaks that training. It tells your body that it no longer has to brace for impact. And with that comes a calm you didn't know was possible. The kind of calm that isn't dependent on being chosen, approved of, or understood. This is where choosing peace becomes a daily practice. You don't argue your truth anymore. You don't correct distortions. You don't rush to defend yourself when you're misrepresented. Not because you're afraid, but because you've learned that peace is more valuable than being right in a conversation that leads nowhere. And this choice does something profound. It dissolves the emotional hooks that once kept you connected. Without your reactions, the push and pull loses its charge. There's no emotional electricity left to conduct the old patterns. What once felt magnetic now feels distant, almost neutral. You begin to experience life without constant emodio, now turbulence. Your thoughts slow down, your body relaxes, your energy returns to you, and in that stillness you understand something deeply. Peace was never something you had to earn by enduring chaos. It was something you were always allowed to choose. This isn't avoidance, it's wisdom. It's the quiet confidence of someone who knows their worth doesn't need to be defended. It needs to be protected. And as that peace settles in, you may feel something confusing rise to the surface. Even though you're calmer, clearer, and safer, there's a pull, a longing, a strange ache that doesn't match the logic of everything you now understand. This is where many people doubt themselves. They think, if it was so bad, why do I still miss them? But this isn't weakness. This is the trauma bond revealing itself. When love is mixed with unpredictability, it doesn't just touch the heart, it wires itself into the nervous system. The highs felt intoxicating because they followed emotional deprivation. The relief felt like love because it followed fear. Over time, your body learned to associate intensity with connection, and breaking that bond feels less like leaving a person and more like withdrawing from a drug. That's why detachment can feel unsettling at first. Your mind knows you're free, but your body is still adjusting to a world without emotional whiplash. You're no longer riding waves of hope and disappointment, and the absence of that chaos can feel unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong. This is the stage where compassion for yourself matters most. You don't shame the part of you that still feels attached. You don't rush your healing. You simply observe the cravings without obeying them. Each time you choose not to re-enter the cycle, the bond weakens. Each day of consistency rewires your sense of safety. And slowly something shifts. You stop missing them and start missing who you were before you learned to survive love. You realize the bond wasn't proof of connection. It was evidence of conditioning. And with every grounded, peaceful moment, your system learns a new truth: love does not have to hurt to be real. Breaking a trauma bond isn't dramatic, it's repetitive. It's choosing yourself again and again, even on days when the past feels loud. And one day, without ceremony, the pull fades, not because you forced it, but because you outgrew it. And when that pull finally loosens its grip, you may notice a new kind of emptiness. Not the aching kind, but a quiet space where questions used to live. For a long time, your mind was crowded with why. Why did they do this? Why wasn't I enough? Why did they change? You believed that if you could just get the right answers, everything would settle. But healing has a way of teaching you something unexpected. Closure doesn't arrive as information. It arrives as peace. There comes a moment when you realize you no longer want explanations from the person who hurt you. Not because the questions weren't valid, but because their answers were never designed to heal you. They were designed to protect their image, rewrite history, or pull you back into doubt. And once you see that, the need for external closure begins to dissolve. Your healing becomes the resolution. The fact that you can breathe again, that your days are no longer shaped by anticipation or anxiety, that you trust your perceptions instead of second guessing them. These are answers, just not in the form you once expected. You stop replaying conversations, searching for the perfect final sentence. You understand that some chapters end without dialogue. And that doesn't mean they're unfinished, it means they're complete in a different way. The closure you needed wasn't an apology or an admission, it was the ability to move forward without dragging the past with you. And in choosing your healing, you quietly step out of the emotional courtroom. You no longer need a verdict, you no longer need them to acknowledge the harm for it to be real. Your life, your growth, your restored sense of self becomes the closing argument. This is where freedom deepens. You are no longer tied to what they think, feel, or admit. You are anchored in what you know. And that knowing, steady, grounded, and self-honoring, is what finally allows you to turn the page without looking back. And as you turn that page, something remarkable happens. You don't just move on, you move up. Growth begins quietly, almost invisibly, in the choices you make when no one is watching. You choose healthier connections. You listen to discomfort instead of overriding it. You pause when something feels familiar in the wrong way. This is not accidental. It is wisdom earned. Your growth becomes the natural consequence of everything you endured and learned. And without trying to prove anything, it creates a contrast that speaks louder than words ever could. You become calmer, clearer, more grounded. You stop chasing intensity and start valuing consistency. And in that shift, you become someone who cannot be pulled back into old patterns. This is where consequence reveals itself, not as punishment, but as divergence. You move forward while they remain tethered to the same defenses, the same cycles, the same need for control. Your evolution creates distance that no argument ever could. Not because you're better, but because you're different. And that difference is confronting. Growth has a way of exposing stagnation without accusation. When you no longer respond to manipulation, when you no longer seek validation, it highlights what hasn't changed on the other side. You become a reminder, not of their loss, but of their refusal to look inward. But here's the truth that matters most. This growth isn't for them. It's not a performance or a message. It's the byproduct of choosing yourself consistently. You're building a life that doesn't revolve around recovery from pain, but expansion beyond it. You become emotionally unreachable, not because you've closed your heart, but because you've raised your standards. What once wounded you can no longer reach you. And in that elevation, you realize the greatest consequence of all is not what they feel, it's who you've become. And finally, after all the awareness, the silence, the detachment, and the growth, you arrive at the most profound stage, walking away, whole. Doesn't mean unscarred. Whole doesn't mean that the pain vanished or that the memories are erased. Whole means that you have stitched yourself together from the pieces they tried to take. And in doing so, you've discovered a version of yourself that is stronger, wiser, and unapologetically alive. You no longer carry the weight of their opinions, their judgments, or their manipulations. You no longer measure your woe art by how well you could soothe their ego or contain their chaos. Every step you take is measured by your own heartbeat, guided by your own compass. And in this wholeness, freedom takes on a new texture. It's not loud or dramatic, it's steady, unshakable, and deeply satisfying. Walking away whole is the ultimate victory because it rewrites the story. You were never abandoned, you were never powerless, you were simply waiting to reclaim yourself. You move forward without bitterness, not because you've forgiven them, but because you no longer need their validation to feel complete. Your closure is self-generated. Your peace is self-earned. And the most beautiful irony is this. When you walk away whole, you leave them hunted. Not by your words, not by revenge, but by the truth of your wholeness. They feel the absence of control, the absence of influence, the absence of their familiar patterns. And in that absence, guilt surfaces not because you inflicted it, but because reality finally catches up with them. So if you take anything from this journey, take this. Leaving a narcissist is not about breaking them. It's about building yourself. It's about choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, and wholeness over dependency. And when you do, you don't just survive, you flourish. You don't just escape, you become untouchable. And now, as we come to the close of this journey together, I want you to feel something deeply, not just hear it. Everything we've talked about, the awareness, the detachment, the reclamation of self-worth, the growth, the wholeness, it all points to one undeniable truth. Freedom is yours to claim. Not someday, not after proving yourself to anyone else, not after they admit their wrongs. Right now, in this very moment, you have the power to step out of the patterns that have held you captive and into the life you were always meant to live. Imagine it for a moment. Imagine waking up and feeling light, not because the past disappeared, but because it no longer has a hold on you. Imagine being able to love, to laugh, to connect, without fear, without manipulation, without compromise of your own value. Imagine walking into a room and feeling whole, unshaken, untethered. That is not a fantasy. That is the reality that begins the moment you stop negotiating with someone who thrives on your doubt and start negotiating with yourself. I want you to leave this space today knowing something critical. Leaving a narcissist is not an act of revenge. It's an act of courage. It's not about making them feel guilt. It's about reclaiming every piece of your heart they tried to own. It's about proving to yourself that your life, your peace, your growth, your joy are non-negotiable. And here's the most beautiful part. The more you choose yourself, the more unshakable you become. You don't need explanations, apologies, or validation. Your life becomes your message. Your healing becomes your victory. Your freedom becomes undeniable. So step forward fully, unapologetically, and let your life shine so brightly that nothing from the past can dim it. Stand tall, breathe deeply, and remember, you are not just leaving, you are becoming unstoppable.